Welcome to the 50th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are now in Book 4. What is Book 4? I don't know what it's called. I forget already. I know that we are in Chapter 2, the effect of increase of population upon the distribution of wealth. This is where we'll come back to. What is Book 4 about? Effect of material progress upon the distribution of wealth. Right. So the first thing we're talking about, it's like, yes, we know what things are. That rent goes up and takes all the extra produce, but we're trying to figure out why. And then its first thing is like, is it the increase of population? Well, no, not really, because with increased population comes increased division of labor and efficiency. And we're still in that chapter. Then we'll get to the next one. Okay. But, writes George, while, writes George, the increase of population thus increases rent by lowering the margin of cultivation. It is a mistake to look upon this as the only mode by which, well, okay. I mean, so yeah, George does sort of concede that increase of population is pushing towards increasing of rent, but by lowering the margin of cultivation. But he just spent a whole bunch of time saying that increasing population has this other effect of allowing for division of labor and specialization and certain efficiencies, which pushes against, it enables the margin of cultivation to doesn't, need to move necessarily. But anyway, George continues. It is a mistake to look upon this as the only mode by which rent advances as population grows. Increasing population increases rent without reducing the margin of cultivation. Yeah, okay. And notwithstanding the dicta of such writers as McCulloch, yes, because the argument was, in a Malthusian sense, that extra population means you're having to use crappier land, and so that on average the efficiency of labor has decreased, so there's not enough to go around. Whereas George shows that by efficiencies of more and more people, the margin of cultivation actually doesn't need to go out anywhere, and yet we do see rent going up, and that's sort of what we're seeking the answer. Why does rent keep going up? And the answer is land monopoly, but George is being a little withholding. Increasing population without reducing the margin of cultivation, and notwithstanding the dicta of such writers as McCulloch, who assert that rent would not arise were there an unbounded extent of equally good land, increases it without reference to the natural qualities of the land, for the increased powers of cooperation and exchange which come with increased population are equivalent to, nay, I think we can say without metaphor that they give an increased capacity to land. I always sort of uh, want to say when people talk about having an unbounded extent of equally good land, when people imagine this, when I imagine this, I always just think of, endless fields and fields of beautiful fertile soil. But equally good land for me in this modern era would mean an equally good place to get a job and with like an equally cool like social scene or whatever. And like I don't really care if there's like the most fertile farmland totally available to me wherever. I care like where can I live and work with people I want to work with, doing things I want to do. And for me, the things I value most in land is, am I near friends? Am I near good soccer community? And am I near a good video game development scene? Although with my video game development, a lot of that can be done remotely, but I still want a community to interact with. And I don't love working remote and alone, but anyway. And I guess down the line, oh, I also clearly want a dating pool, I suppose. I can only imagine. Now, we're back to George. Equally good land, yes, we can say. Yes. George says, I do not mean to say merely that, like an improvement in the methods or tools of production, the increased power which comes with increased population gives to the same labor an increased result, which is equivalent to an increase in the natural powers of land. Justin says, another day, another George. That's right. George continues, but that it brings out a superior power in labor, which is localized on land, which attaches not to labor generally, but only to labor exerted on particular land, and which thus inheres in the land as much as any qualities of soil, climate, mineral deposit, or natural situation, and passes as they do with the possession of the land. Yes, the increased power with increased population, and that is as good or maybe better perhaps than the qualities of soil, climate, minerals, and so forth. An improvement in the method of cultivation, which with the same outlay will give 2 crops a year in place of 1, or an improvement in tools and machinery which will double the result of labor, will manifestly on a particular piece of ground have the same effect on the produce as a doubling of the fertility of the land. But the difference is in this respect. The improvement in method or in tools can be utilized on any land, but the improvement in fertility can be utilized only on the particular land to which it applies. Now, in large part, the increased productiveness of labor which arises from increased population can be utilized only on particular land and on particular land in greatly varying degrees. Here let us imagine an unbounded savanna, stretching off in unbroken sameness of grass and flower, tree and rill, I don't know what a rill is, till the traveler tires of the monotony. Yeah, see, this is exactly. Anytime you hear me expressing some idea that you think is good, it's probably because I read it from George a couple years ago. And now I just spew it back out again. Along comes the wagon of the first immigrant. Where to settle he cannot tell. Every acre seems as good as every other acre. As to wood, as to water, as to fertility, as to situation, there is absolutely no choice, and he is perplexed by the embarrassment of richness. Tired out with the search for one place that is better than another, he stops, somewhere, anywhere, and starts to make himself a home. The soil is virgin and rich, game is abundant, the streams flash with the finest trout, nature is at her very best. He has what, were he in a populous district, would make him rich, but he is very poor. To say nothing of the mental craving which would lead him to welcome the sorriest stranger, he labors under all the material disadvantages of solitude. He can get no temporary assistance for any work that requires a greater union of strength than that afforded by his own family, or by such help as he can permanently keep. Though he has cattle, he cannot often have fresh meat, for to get a beefsteak he must kill a bullock. He must be his own blacksmith, wagon maker, carpenter, and cobbler, in short, a jack of all trades and master of none. He cannot have his children schooled, for to do so he must himself pay and maintain a teacher. Such things as he cannot produce himself he must buy in quantities and keep on hand, or else go without. For he cannot be constantly leaving his work and making a long journey to the verge of civilization, and when forced to do so, the getting of a vial of medicine or the replacement of a broken auger, I'm not sure what an auger is, may cost him the labor of himself and horses for days. Under such circumstances, though nature is prolific, the man is poor. It is an easy matter for him to get enough to eat. But beyond this, his labor will suffice to satisfy only the simplest wants in the rudest way. Soon there comes another immigrant. Although every quarter section of the boundless plain is as good as every other quarter section, he is not beset by any embarrassment as to where to settle. Though the land is the same, there is one place that is clearly better for him than any other place, and that is where there is already a settler, and he may have a neighbor. He settles by the side of the first comer, whose condition is at once greatly improved, and to whom many things are now possible that were before impossible. For two men may help each other to do things that one man could never do. Another immigrant comes, and guided by the same attraction, settles where there are already two. Another and another, until around our first corner there are a score of neighbors. Labor has now an effectiveness which in the solitary state it could not approach. If heavy work is to be done, the settlers have a log rolling, and together accomplish in a day what singly would require years. When one kills a bullock, the others take part of it, returning when they kill, and thus they have fresh meat all the time. Together they hire a schoolmaster, and the children of each are taught for a fractional part of what similar teaching would have cost the first settler. It becomes a comparatively easy matter to send to the nearest town, for someone is always going. But there is less need for such journeys. A blacksmith and a wheelwright soon set up shops, and our settler can have his tools repaired for a small part of the labor it formerly cost him. A store is opened, and he can get what he wants as he wants it. A post office, soon added, gives him regular communication with the rest of the world. Then come a cobbler, a carpenter, a harness maker, a doctor, and a little church soon arises. Satisfactions become possible that in the solitary state were impossible. There are gratifications for the social and the intellectual nature, for that part of the man that rises above the animal. The power of sympathy, the sense of companionship, the emulation of comparison and contrast. What does that mean? The emulation of comparison and contrast. Open a wider and fuller and more varied life. In rejoicing there are others to rejoice. In sorrow the mourners do not mourn alone. There are husking bees and apple parings and quilting parties. Quilting parties! I don't know what a husking bee is. Or an apple paring, except I know what paring an apple is. Though the ballroom be unplastered and the orchestra but a fiddle, the notes of the magician are yet in the strain, and Cupid dances with the dancers. At the wedding there are others to admire and enjoy. In the house of death there are watchers. By the open grave stands human sympathy to sustain the mourners. Occasionally comes a straggling lecturer to open up glimpses of the world of science, of literature, or of art. In election times comes stump speakers, and the citizen arises to a sense of dignity and power, and the cause of empires is tried before him in the struggle of John Doe and Richard Doe for his support and vote. And by comes the circus, talked of months before, and opening to children to whose horizons has been the prairie, all the realms of the imagination, princes and princesses of fairy tale, mail-clad crusaders and turbaned Moors, Cinderella's fairy coach and the giants of nursery lore, lions such as crouched before Daniel, or encircling Roman amphitheater tore the saints of God. Ostriches who recall the sandy deserts, camels such as stood around when the wicked brethren raised Joseph from the well and sold him into bondage, elephants such as crossed the Alps with Hannibal or felt the sword of the Maccabees, and glorious music that thrills and builds in the chambers of the mind as rose the sunny dome of Kubla Khan. Whole time I'm reading that, I'm just thinking about playing Valheim. Go to our settler now, and say to him, You have so many fruit trees which you planted, so much fencing, such a well, a barn, a house, in short, you have by your labor added so much value to this farm. Your land itself is not quite so good. You have been cropping it, and by it will need manure. I will give you the full value of all your improvements, if you will give it to me, and go again with your family beyond the verge of settlement. He would laugh at you. His land yields no more wheat or potatoes than before, but it does yield far more of all the necessaries and comforts of life. His labor upon it will bring no heavier crops, and we will suppose no more valuable crops, but it will bring far more of all the other things for which men work. The presence of other settlers, the increase of population, has added to the productiveness in these things of labor bestowed upon it, and this added productiveness gives it a superiority over land of equal natural quality where there are as yet no settlers. If no land remains to be taken up, except such as is as far removed from population as was our settler's land when he first went upon it, the value or rent of this land will be measured by the whole of this added capability. If, however, as we have supposed, there is a continuous stretch of equal land over which population is now spreading, it will not be necessary for the new settler to go into the wilderness as did the first. He will settle just beyond the other settlers and will get the advantage of proximity to them. The value or rent of our settler's land will thus depend on the advantage which it has from being at the center of population over that on the verge. In the one case, the margin of production will remain as before. In the other, the margin of production will be raised. Population still continues to increase, and as it increases, so do the economies which its increase permits, and which in effect add to the productiveness of the land. Our first settler's land being the center of population, the store, the blacksmith's forge, the wheelwright's shop, are set up on it, or on its margin, where soon arises a village, which rapidly grows into a town, the center of exchanges for the people of the whole district, with no greater agricultural productiveness than it had at first. This land now begins to develop a productiveness of a higher kind. To labor expended in raising corn or wheat or potatoes, it will yield no more of those things than at first. But to labor expended in the subdivided branches of production which require proximity to other producers, and especially to labor expended in that final part of production which consists in distribution, it will yield much larger returns. The wheat grower may go further on and find land on which his labor will produce as much wheat and nearly as much wealth. But the artisan, the manufacturer, the storekeeper, the professional man find that their labor expended here at the center of exchanges will yield them much more than if expended even at a little distance away from it. And this excess of productiveness, for such purposes the landowner can claim, just as he could an excess in its wheat producing power. That was the end of the sentence. And so our settler is able to sell in building lots a few of his acres for prices which it would not bring for wheat growing if its fertility had been multiplied many times. With the proceeds he builds himself a fine house and furnishes it handsomely. That is to say, to reduce the transaction to its lowest terms, the people who wish to use the land build and furnish the house for him, on condition that he will let them avail themselves of the superior productiveness which the increase of population has given the land. Long paragraph. I sort of zoned out, lost the plot a little bit. I'm not going back. It's too bad, so sad. Population still keeps on increasing, giving greater and greater utility to the land and more wealth to its owner. The town has grown into a city, a St. Louis, a Chicago, or San Francisco, and still it grows. Production is here carried on upon a great scale, with the best machinery and the most favorable facilities. The division of labor becomes extremely minute, wonderfully multiplying efficiency. Exchanges are of such volume and rapidity that they are made with the minimum of friction and loss. Here is the heart, the brain of the vast social organism that has grown up from the germ of the first settlement. Here has developed one of the great ganglia of the human world. Hither run all roads, hither set all currents, through all the vast regions round about. Here, if you have anything to sell, is the market. Here, if you have anything to buy, is the largest and choicest stock. Here, intellectual activity is gathered into a focus, and here springs that stimulus which is born of the collision of mind with mind. Here are the great libraries, the storehouses and granaries of knowledge, the learned professors, the famous specialists. Here are museums and art galleries, collections of philosophical apparatus, and all things rare and valuable and best of their kind. Here come great actors and orators and singers from all over the world. Here, in short, is a center of human life in all its varied manifestations. So enormous are the advantages which this land now offers for the application of labor, that instead of one man with a span of horses scratching over acres, maybe stretching is what was supposed to be there, maybe typo, you may count in places thousands of workers to that acre, working tier on floors raised one above the other, 5, 6, 7, and 8 stories from the ground, while underneath the surface of the earth engines are throbbing with pulsations that exert the force of thousands of horses. All these advantages attach to the land. It is on this land and no other that they can be utilized. For here is the center of population, the focus of exchanges, the marketplace and workshop of the highest forms of industry. The productive powers which density of population has attached to this land are equivalent to the multiplication of its original fertility by the hundredfold and the thousandfold. And rent, which measures the difference between this added productiveness and that of the least productive land in use, has increased accordingly. Our settler, or whoever has succeeded to his right to the land, is now a millionaire. Like another Rip Van Winkle, he may have lain down and slept. Still he is rich, not from anything he has done, but from the increase of population. There are lots from which every foot of frontage the owner may draw more than an average mechanic can earn. There are lots that will sell for more than would suffice to pave them with gold coin. In the principal streets are towering buildings of granite, marble, iron, and plate glass, finished in the most expensive style, replete with every convenience, yet they are not worth as much as the land upon which they rest. The same land, in nothing changed, which when our first settler came upon it had no value at all. That this is the way in which the increase of population powerfully acts in increasing rent, whoever in a progressive country will look round him may see for himself. The process is going on under his eyes. The increasing difference in the productiveness of the land in use, which causes an increasing rise in rent, results not so much from the necessities of increased population compelling the resort to inferior land, as from the increased productiveness which increased population gives to the lands already in use. The most valuable lands on the globe, the lands which yield the highest rent, are not lands of surpassing natural fertility, but lands to which a surpassing utility has been given by the increase of population. The increase of productiveness or utility which increase of population gives to certain lands, in the way to which I have been calling attention, attaches as it were to the mere quality of extension. The valuable quality of land that has become a center of population is its superficial capacity. It makes no difference whether it is fertile. Alluvial soil like that of Philadelphia, rich bottomland like that of New Orleans, a filled-in marsh like that of St. Petersburg, or a sandy waste like the greater part of San Francisco. And where value seems to arise from superior natural qualities, such as deep water and good anchorage, rich deposits of coal and iron, or heavy timber, observation also shows that these superior qualities are brought out, rendered tangible by population. The coal and iron fields of Pennsylvania, that today are worth enormous sums, were 50 years ago valueless. What is the efficient cause of the difference? Simply the difference in population. The coal and iron beds of Wyoming and Montana, which today are valueless, will in 50 years from now be worth millions on millions, simply because in the meantime population will have greatly increased. It is a well-provisioned ship, this on which we sail through space. Spaceship Earth. Sail through space. I wonder how original that term was in this time. Even calling it a well-provisioned ship on which we sail through space. We didn't even have aeroplanes yet. If the bread and beef above decks seems to grow scarce, we but open a hatch and there is a new supply, of which before we never dreamed, and very great command over the services of others comes to those who, as the hatches are open, are permitted to say, "This is mine." To recapitulate, the effect of increasing population upon the distribution of wealth is to increase rent, and consequently to diminish the proportion of the produce which goes to capital and labor in two ways. First, by lowering the margin of cultivation. Second, by bringing out in land special capabilities otherwise latent, and by attaching special capabilities to particular lands. I am disposed to think that the latter mode, to which little attention has been given by political economists, is really the more important. But this, in our inquiry, is not a matter of moment. I'm fully persuaded. All right. See you next time.